In this video, I'll be adding complex camera effects, rideable creatures, bird nests, and much more. First, let's work on the creatures. They already have a bait system, but nothing else in terms of interaction with the player. So now, when you give the right bait to a creature, you can add that creature as one of 4 companions who you can then call at any moment. When you call one of your companions, they will run to you, and after a while they will go back to their normal behavior, like eating, drinking, hunting, etc. But they will always keep following you. You probably already know what's next: creature riding. But before I get to that, I really need some names for these creatures. So give me your best ideas. I'm absolutely awful with names, so I'm counting on your ideas for this. So, creature riding. I decided to keep the normal player and just attach them to a creature when they ride it. This approach means that while you ride the creature, you can still do just about everything else, like collecting items, calling a companion, and taking photos. It took a while to get this set up, but I really like how it turned out. The only thing bugging me right now is that the creature sometimes gets stuck on small, hard to see obstacles, so I might add an auto jump to fix that later. One behavior I hadn't added yet was building nests, so that's what I did next. This is relatively simple. The creature chooses a location to start building its nest, gathers some kind of resource, brings it and adds it to the nest, then goes back to searching for resources until the nest is completely built. And if the creature has a nest, that's of course where they will sleep at night. As I mentioned in a previous video, discovering locations and progressing through the game will give you new effects to take different looking photos. So it's very important that these effects are unique and interesting. First, we've got the painting shader. I tried out a few different techniques for this and ended up using the Kuwahara filter. I mostly used a tutorial from Matthijs Verkuijen, apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but he goes over how it works in great detail, so I'll put a link to his video in the description. I noticed that this filter produces some very sharp lines, so I added a subtle blur option to hide this and a very simple canvas effect. Now one of my favorites, because I think it turned out great, the ASCII shader. The way this works is by first desaturating the image and dividing it into a grid. Then I get the correct UV coordinates for this grid so I can sample a texture. I made a texture atlas. This is a square texture divided into a 3x3 grid with the ASCII symbols sorted by their brightness value. Finally, we can use the brightness value of the low resolution image to offset the UV coordinates and sample the correct symbol for each square. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments below and I'll reply as soon as possible. I also added some options to change the color, make it glow, and highlight creatures, which is an option I added to a lot of the shaders. I thought it would be cool to have a dithering effect, so that's what I added next. This is mostly the same as the ASCII shader, but if one dot is really big, it can leak into the neighboring squares. So I had to sample every neighboring square to get this to look right. And my favorite of all, the sketch shader. There is a lot going on here, so I'll go over it quickly. First of all, there's 2 kinds of outlines: scene depth and scene normal. They draw lines by comparing neighboring pixels to find where there are large differences. The second has more details but looks bad at long distances. So I added an option to adjust the sketch detail fall off distance. Next, I do some math to get the scene shadows and use this to add the hatching texture in the shadows. All of this is also slightly warped to give it a more hand-drawn feeling. This is the base effect, but I added a bunch of other options, like highlighting the creatures, center fall off, and paper backgrounds. Finally, I also added an outline shader. I still think this normal shading with just an outline looks weird though, so I might add cell shading to this effect in the future. Something I've been meaning to fix is the vision of the creatures, because right now with the AI perception component it is always straightforward, instead of moving with the head. Unfortunately, you can't attach this component to other components, nor can you move it. What I tried at first was creating a second actor containing the AI perception component and attaching this actor to the head of the creature. This solution kinda works, but it's messy and it meant that I couldn't change settings like field of view or view distance. So I decided to make my own system using line traces. The idea is pretty simple. You cast a bunch of line traces in a cone shape, which is of course affected by the field of view, and whatever these line traces hit, the creature has percepted. To improve performance, I made updates on a fixed interval. I also decreased the amount of line traces depending on the creature's distance from the player. So creatures near the player will have very accurate perception, but the further they are, the less accurate the perception is. Now I want to get started on some sound. Footstep sounds, item sounds, ambient sounds, but most important of all, creature sounds. The creatures can play a random sound at a given random interval. This is used for things like birds tweeting, roars, and other stuff like that. Then there's movement sounds. For land creatures this would be footsteps, but for birds this is the sound of the wings flapping. And also some eating and drinking sounds. Even though it's still very simple, I'm already pretty happy with the sounds, because when you hear an animal, you know that this is actually a creature in the world and not just some background noise. I also love how you can hear bird wings flapping as they fly away when scared. I've also fleshed out the game menu. It looks better, there's now input feedback for all the buttons, and you can click this icon to track which photos you still need to take to study a certain creature. You can now also see the exact percentage you've completed per creature category. I decided not to have a map. This is because discovery will be a big part of it, and staring at a minimap with a location marker isn't something I want in my game. So instead, the player will have to rely on various landmarks and their compass to explore the world. Speaking of the compass, there's now a HUD. I kept it basic because I wanted to be as immersive as possible. I added a simple dot in the middle of the screen which indicates what you can interact with, and the compass. This compass is just moving a texture side to side depending on the rotation of the player. Combined with a fade on the sides and some smooth interpolation, you get this. I got some comments about the movement feeling floaty, so I added screen shake. I kept it subtle, but I think this really helps ground the player in the world. I also added some camera shake when landing, which of course changes intensity depending on the velocity of the impact. I greatly improved the collision accuracy of the creatures, as you can see here, and they now also run away when you throw something against them. Creatures you haven't finished studying are grayed out. The text when discovering something is now animated. Thrown items no longer clip through objects when moving fast. And finally, creatures now align to the surface they are walking on. I think this is a great foundation for the game, but there's one aspect of it I haven't even started on: water. And this is something I can't wait to work on, as it's going to be a big part of the game. If this game interests you, consider wishlisting it on Steam or subscribe. And don't forget to tell me your creature name ideas. Until next time, bye.